Story 5, The Linen Closet, reading a couple stories here, and something that happened to me came to mind. You ever have moments that you blip out completely, as if your brain can bother to remember something only so often? So it's shoved into the depths of your memory, but something always seems to unleash it. I'd forgotten the house on 12 Dahlia Road in the little town of Mary Esther, Florida, though forgotten isn't altogether the right word here, because the truth is, I'd never really forget. The things I'm about to tell you are completely true, in which even my family can attest to. Not one to be fictitious or exaggerating. I will tell you this story in its entirety. Names and places, however, have been changed to protect those that have witnessed it. My husband passed away, and I'd been pregnant with my daughter. On his way home from work one evening, he'd been T-boned by a drunk driver and had slid peacefully into a coma while on site. He'd simply never woken up. During my mourning, I'd stayed with my parents until our daughter, Callie, was born. She was, I want to say, 9 months old when I'd been feeding her breakfast in the small kitchen one morning. Her high chair was wedged between the table and the wall as best I could manage, while still allowing room for movement in the little dining area. My father hadn't been able to squeeze through the gap, and I guess that had been the snapping point. "Lori," he sighed, setting his coffee mug on the table heavily. Coffee sloshed over the rim, hand stained the table, scratched and marred surface. "Catherine, my mom, and I have been talking for a while now, and we'd like to give you the other house. A little backstory here. When I'd been 11, we'd moved shortly after my grandfather had passed, and into my grandmother's house to cities over. My father had felt she needed someone to look after her in her age, and we hadn't bothered to sell the other house. Instead, we'd rent it out and save the extra money for emergencies. Occasionally, we'd lent it to children of friends or a college graduate transitioning from school to the real world. It was slightly damaged from over the years, but it was my childhood home. I was more than happy to raise my daughter in the house that had shaped me as a child. It wasn't as if I didn't enjoy my family or didn't love them enough. The memories I had after Kevin's death were full of warm comfort and patience. My parents were wonderful and had made a point to make sure I never felt as if I inconvenienced them in any way. Looking back on it, I think they were a little sad I was taking their only daughter and granddaughter from their home, but they also understood my need for independence again. I needed my own home, my own space, something in which I could carve out mine. In the world, in big, bold letters, and the house in Mary Esther seemed like a perfect opportunity. It had taken almost a week to ready the house just to move in. Luckily, friends, family, and neighbors seemed to crawl out of the woodwork to help. They'd installed a new garage door, a working dishwasher, helped fix the leaky roof. They'd even repaired the damages a previous tenant's dog had wrecked. The dog must have been a massive thing because it had broken sliding glass bathtub door, shredded through cabinets, and taken huge chunks out of the hallway's carpet. In the end, we couldn't save the floor and ripped it out. We placed down linoleum tile that looked like faux flooring, but much cheaper. The linen closet at the end of the hall had been left unscathed, so the carpet in there remained. It poked out a little along the bottom of the door, but it was tolerable. I wasn't about to complain, after all. Everybody had put in so much effort to make me right at home. A little fluff under a door was the last thing I was going to gripe about. I was thankful it was a Monday evening, when I'd finally gotten settled into my new home. I had taken putting everything where it belonged on pause so that I could give Callie a bath in the new tub. We hadn't had a tub in my grandmother's home. The house had been fashioned around someone handicapped, so we'd had the big, bulky shower stalls. In the new house, though, we had a big tub in the hall bathroom, and Callie was more than excited to check it out. Covered in bubbles of lavender-scented baby shampoo, she giggled and played until she was all tuckered out. I realized I'd accidentally put up all the towels instead of leaving a handful in the bathroom for drying, and let Callie sit in the little remaining water as I went to the linen closet at the end of the hall. It was only a short 10 paces away, at most. It had been the linen closet when I'd been a child, and my mother had taken to putting the excess sheets, towels, and linens along wooden shelves that lined the interior of the spacious room. Having recently acquired the house, I took up the same habit, comforted by the familiarity of my childhood home, its familiar smell. I listened to Callie splash and play in the last few drops of water as I stopped short in the hallway. It was the first time I actually noticed the doorknob. It wasn't just a smooth, gold knob like the other closets in the hall, or even the bedroom doors, for that matter. A turnstile lock on the doorknob. On the outside, it didn't sit well with me. Had someone been locking someone? Something in the linen closet? Maybe it was the dog that destroyed the house, I thought to myself. Maybe it got out of hand occasionally, and they'd locked it in the spacious closet. It was odd that the door would have a lock on the outside, and I made a mental note to change it. What had the previous renters been doing here? What if Callie locked herself in the closet by accident? She was autistic and would panic horribly. It would take hours for her to calm down if that happened. I swaddled her in the oversized towel, which hung over her feet and pooled on the floor in heavy maroon shades. Her blonde hair spiked all over her head in all directions, and she giggled as I dried and tickled her mercilessly. Afterwards, I slid her into her Hello Kitty-footed pajamas and tucked her into her crib. I hated that crib, to tell you the truth. It was massive, and being a small woman of only 5 feet in height, it was a real pain to get her in and out of the thing. It felt as if my abdomen was bruising every time I leaned over the wooden rails to pick her up. I sat in the large rocking chair my grandmother had given to me as a housewarming present, and read her the tale of the last Basilope. It was a book my father had read to me almost every night, in that very room, in that very chair. Truthfully, I was a little homesick. I missed my folks, but more so, I missed Kevin horribly, wishing that he could see us more than anything else. I missed his smell, the texture of his clothes, the feel of his breath. It shattered my heart just to think of him. He'd never even gotten a chance to see Callie or read to her or touch her face. He'd never gotten a chance to watch her first steps, hear her first words, or help her on the bus on the first day of school, all because some stupid kid had decided he'd been okay to drink and drive. I was crying quietly by the time she'd fallen asleep. Sniffling softly, I placed the book on the chair and headed to the bathroom, leaving her door open a crack so I could hear her better. Her soft snores floated after me, leaving her room. The linen closet was directly on the left, the dead center of the end of the hallway. That damn lock, I kept thinking. It just does not make sense. Who would put it there? Was it a temp fix for a broken knob? Maybe. Why not just switch it out with one of the plain bedroom knobs then? I dampened the corner of Callie's bath towel and dabbed my eyes. I hung it over the shower rail and blew my nose in a handful of tissue paper. No more tears, I told myself. It's a new start, a new beginning. The lights in the bathroom flickered briefly, which wasn't exactly abnormal. We lived rather close to the Air Force Base, so the practiced bombings occasionally caused electrical interference. Off in the distance, I remember I could even faintly hear it. The heavy OMPH noise that sounded like heavy fireworks in the distance. I settled into the living room, keeping an ear open for the baby as I began to read in the quiet of the new house. At first, I didn't notice the sound. A new house, it's bound to have some random ticks. The steadily cracking along the top of the walls, a small scraping sound. I muttered in disgust, "Great," as I slid the bookmark into a page and set the novel down. My first thought was, there's some kind of animal in the crawl space. From the way the scraping bounced up and down the wall, suddenly I assumed it was a squirrel. It ran from floor to ceiling, a sound like scurrying and bobbing. Small claws rattled against the wooden posts of the inner wall and sheetrock lining. I followed the nose, trying to track where it could possibly be. It went along the top of the living room wall, down the corner, back up the cold air return in the mouth of the hall, and around the top of the door frame of the bathroom. "Oh, it's going to wake up, Callie," I grumbled, getting royally pissed off suddenly. She'd already had a traumatic day, with moving and all the people. The last thing she needed was to wake up and have a meltdown. Like I said, she's autistic and absolutely hated anything that wrecked with her routine. Messing with sleep time definitely wrecked her routine. A heavy thump and something that sounded like a sleigh, and I decided I've just about had enough. I darted in my room, across the hall from Callie's room, and next to that damn closet, and snatched the phone receiver off its charging base. I punched in my father's cell phone number instantly and listened to the ringing. In the span of time it took him to answer, the thing in the crawl space had maneuvered to the ceiling right outside my bedroom door. "Lori, are you okay?" was the first thing he asked, bless his heart. "Yeah," I reassured him instantly, feeling more than a little guilty and foolish for calling so abruptly. "It's just that there's something moving around in the crawl space beneath the attic in the house." After a short pause, he laughed in his usual warm, grumbly way and said, "It's probably a possum or squirrel." I agreed with him. True, but I don't know who to call about it, and I'm afraid it'll wake up the baby. A few grumbling noises, and the slam of a pickup truck's tailgate later, he began, "I can head out in the morning." But my mother interrupted him. "Is that Lori? Does she need something?" Her voice had begun to go a bit nervous around the edges and raising. "We can be over there in 15 minutes. Honey, it's just a rodent problem," he tried to tell her, but being my mom, that was the worst thing he could have told her. A rodent problem? Damn it, Alan. She'd gone into full raging by then. "Get the truck loaded up. Our grandbaby doesn't need that crap." The scraping had intensified by then and slithered around the wall in the corner of my room. "Is that it?" Dad asked, hearing the sound over the phone. "Yeah," I answered, smacking the wall in an attempt to frighten and quiet the wretched thing. It didn't work. Instead, it became more agitated and scraped with frantic claws that sounded as if they were the size of butcher knives. "Jesus," he muttered. "Catherine." To my mother, he shouted, Get the shovel from beside the garage while I get the keys. To me, don't aggravate it. It might have rabies. Hell, I hadn't even thought about that until then. Can it get in the actual house? I asked, worrying for my child seeping into my heart. I darted across the hall and peeked into her room, but she was still fast asleep in the big crib, with her princess nightlight shining over her. Block off the cold air return and the closet, he informed me. If it's in the crawl space, it might be able to get to the ventilation fan in the utility closet. A new set of worries plagued me as he promised to be there in no less than 15 minutes. And if anything else happened, to call his cell phone right away. I closed the door to Callie's room as a precaution and kicked into gear as I slid the phone into my back pocket. While the creature scraped and bounced down the walls, I somehow moved the small recliner in the living room down the linoleum floor of the hall and positioned it in front of the cold air return below the utility closet. I'd successfully blocked both with one piece of furniture. Feeling rather proud of myself, I sat in the chair for a moment and waited on Mom and Dad. Silence abruptly filled the hall. The scuttling drained away as if it had never been. It was so unnerving. The hairs on the back of my neck raised as goose flesh marched up and down my arms, climbed my cheeks. It hadn't been silent for almost an hour. Nothing but constant scraping, slithering, bouncing, and scratching. I'd have preferred the movement to the unsettling, deafening quiet. With her bedroom closed, I didn't even have Callie's light snore to drown it out. I sat in that hall, in that chair, and listened to the sound of my own pulse rushing through my ears for I don't know how long. Each rhythmic rush of blood seemed louder than the last. I tried to lick my suddenly dry lips, but found my tongue had been equally devoid of moisture. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. My thoughts raced. Had it gotten hurt or maybe stuck? Maybe it had found an escape and I was wasting my parents' time. I felt like a fool sitting there with my chair wedged against the wall, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. But then something shoved the chair from behind, and I was moved a good half-foot. Too scared to even scream, I shoved the chair back just as hard. The only thought, I can honestly say, that filled my head at that precise moment was of my baby. Callie was in that house with that creature that was shoving against my chair, shoving against my back. My baby was in possible mortal danger. My heart soared as I went into some kind of protective overdrive. I jumped up and whirled, shoving with all my might to slam the chair right back into that damn wall. No creature on earth was going to burst into my home and threaten me and my child. The utility door tried to open once more, rocking the chair forward before I kicked it shut again. Scraping, scratching, a kind of odd hiss, and it was back into the ceiling. It scrambled faster now, and I scrambled just as fast after it. It darted down the hall, bouncing between the door frames of the guest room, the bathroom, my bedroom, Callie's, before starting all over again. I was going to kill the thing with my own hands at this point. Let it come down the utility closet. I was going to strangle it to death for doing this crap to me. Squirrel, possum, rat, whatever. It was dead, I tell you. My pulse was pounding on the back of my tongue so hard I could almost taste it. I'd grabbed the broom from the bathroom and wielded it like a sword as I waited for the creature to seek purchase somewhere. Hell, at that point, I'd probably slam the broom handle through the ceiling to kill that little devil. I was snarling, star-craving mad, trying to keep as quiet as possible. I felt as if I had become an overprotective mama bear, and I needed blood to calm down. Something shifted and the scrapings changed. It went into the ceiling space in the linen closet. I was so enraged I nearly ripped the doorknob off the door to open it. But before I could, what sounded as if wooden boards, were being rendered and ripped from inside, I stopped, the onslaught of fury in me feeding to near panic. It felt as if the fight had gone right out of me, replaced solely with horrifying, chilling terror. It hadn't sounded big enough to do that much damage. It hadn't sounded like it had fingers or teeth that could yank the ceiling right out of the little room. A heavy thump and a slithery shift before what I could only imagine sounded of heavy towels and sheets falling to the ground within the linen closet. The growl that crawled from under the door sent shivers up my spine and arms. Broom in hand, I was preparing to slaughter it while my heart was wedged in my throat, and I wondered, for the first time, if I'd actually survive it. It sounded like a dog. I know that sounds crazy, but it sounded like a dog pacing in the confines of the linen closet, and fear, cold and real, iced my body from the inside out. The doorknob grabbed my attention, and I swear to you, it started to turn. That damn lock, and I clicked it home. The creature howled, livid beyond all belief, and slammed into the door bodily, heavily. The thick wood physically shook in the frame. Phone retrieved from my back pocket. I frantically called my father as tears filled my eyes. I honestly did not expect to survive the otherworldly creature I had locked in my linen closet. How could I protect my baby if I was dead? I was almost crying. He answered on the third ring, the sound of my mother laughing in the background. "Where are you?" I demanded before he had a chance to say hello, my voice watery with tears of horror and fear. I was full out panicking on how to survive this thing long enough to see to the safety of my child. A couple blocks. "What's wrong?" His voice full of worrying and concern. I could hear the traffic moving around them, the flow of shifting tires, honking horns, the sounds of the city. My city. It's some kind of dog. I told him, all but actually crying now. The doorknob shifted restlessly before it finally gave up, as if it had hope to somehow break the lock. "That's impossible," my father informed me, scoffing. "It might sound big in the little space. I'm not making this up." I hollered, and the door shivered under another onslaught again. "Holy hell," he whispered in my phone as the noise carried. To my mother, "Get the shotgun from behind the seat and load it." To me, "Get Callie and get out of the house. We'll take care of it. We're almost there. At a red light right now, but we're almost there." I don't know if he was comforting me or him at that point. I watched in horror as the carpet beneath the door moved, as if something was yanking heavily on it, as if they were taking big handfuls and pulling. Not wasting any more time with that, I flung open the door to the baby's room, threw the phone to the floor, and slapped the wall switch until brilliant light flooded the room. She was still resting on her back, one tiny little fist clutched to her pale cheek as her fluffy blonde tufts angled out in every direction. I wrapped her delicately, calmly in the pink little blanket and draped myself over the crib so that I had enough leverage to pull her out. My abdomen screamed in protest as the bars of the crib pushed into my middle. The entire time, the creature in the closet was digging at the carpet under the door. It pulled the fabric back far enough I could see the glue to the floor, holding her to my chest and bouncing her ever so gently, comfortingly, as she nuzzled into me, moodily waking up. I stepped as softly as possible out of her room as to not wake her further. As I neared the end of the hall it howled, and I was too afraid to look back, too scared to look over my shoulder and double-check that the linen closet's door was still holding. Instead, I all but crashed into the front door and ran into the driveway in time to see the spill of headlights illuminate my street. My dad pulled up in his red Ford F-150, shotgun clamped tightly in his hand as I rushed to the flinging open door of the cab. "Are you okay?" My mother was already demanding as she jumped out of her side of the truck to run to me. Dad was pulling the shovel from the back of the truck and moving it to the front porch as he glanced inside the screen door. I assumed he meant to kill and bury the thing with the tools, and never once questioned it. "It's in the linen closet," I told him, tears of relief streaming down my face as I clutched to my mom, all but sobbing. "Oh, baby," she said, and held me close as she shifted Callie from my shoulder to hers. "Go help your father. I've got her." I kissed both their cheeks, tucked Callie's little pajama-covered foot back in the pink blanket, and got to the porch. I took the shovel from its resting place against the brick and stood with Dad beside the door. He cocked his head, ear pressed to the door, and listened. After a moment, he asked, "Is that it?" After a pause, I could hear it, too. It was a guttural, low growl, almost too quiet to have heard. I couldn't manage an answer. My voice felt dried and hollow in my throat, unable to force its way through my cold lips. I managed a weak nod, eyes wide and scared. Switching off the safety, he opened the screen door and stepped inside. I mustered courage and followed him, shovel in hand. The house went quiet and still as we moved through the living room. He peeked into the den and kitchen for a moment before asking me to move the chair in the hall. I propped the shovel and managed to shove the recliner to the side, giving him enough room. He flung open the utility closet first and studied the little room in the hall lighting. A muttered obscenity, and I realized what he's swearing at as I grappled the shovel with numb fingers. Claw marks, deep hand Y, riddled the thick wooden door and the sheetrock lining the room. There was at least hundreds of them, gashing wide into the wall around the backing of the AC unit and down the door. Chills ran rampant up and down my arms and face as he slowly closed the door and turned to the linen closet. The lock, that damn lock, was twisted and free. Had it gotten out? We agreed he'd aim the gun, and I'd open the door in the end. With me to his right, my breath came in labored puffs. My pulse raced through my veins and pounded into my ears until I thought I might faint. I grasped the cold, gold doorknob and twisted, resisting the urge to squeeze my eyes shut against the nightmare. Yanking the door with all my might sent me crashing into Callie's bedroom door frame. My dad was as still as a tomb as he stood there. His eyes shifted from all over the linen closet to me, back to the closet. I peeked around the edge of the door and stared at the chaos as the shovel dropped from my loose, cold fingers. Towels, sheets, pillow covers were littering the floor, covered in thick tufts of loose carpet. Claw marks, matching the utility closet, riddled the walls and doors. The doorknob appeared to display a set of teeth marks. The ceiling, however, was perfectly intact. We spent the better part of half an hour tearing through shredded towels, hefting shelves, throwing sheets, but could not find a single hole into the room. We searched the whole house, gun and shovel in hand, prepared to mutilate any living thing we found, but came up empty. My mother helped me pack Callie's things, some clothes, necessities, and we took their truck back to their home, foregoing my little minivan in the driveway, as my fingers were still too numbered to drive. The next day I packed up as fast as I'd settled in, and, with Callie on my hip, we shoved the for sale sign home into the dirt of the front yard. I never spent another night in the home of my childhood. Story 6. The Demon Butcher of Palos Park. In my hometown we have a legend. In the 1890s, a man called Butcher, this was back when people got their name from their trades, had a butcher shop that was doing well. From what I can tell, he was a large man but cowardly at heart. He was well respected and well liked. He always did good business, but he wasn't a person you'd look twice at. Then the Depression hit. Livestock was harder to come by and many other shops were going out of business. Butcher had good connections and he was getting by. But he had to raise prices, much to the annoyance of his customers. He was losing business. One day a shipment of beef came in. Butcher told his apprentice to carry the load to the basement meat locker. The boy followed his orders, but like most kids, he tried to rush and took too much down at once. The boy tripped on the stairs and broke his neck at the bottom. He died, I assume. Instantly, Butcher heard the noise and soon found the body. The law was pretty scary in these times. Death sentences were still a viable option, and Butcher thought this looked like murder. He could die because of this accident. They might kill him. He panicked and hid the body in his meat freezer. When the boy's parents came, he lied. When the boy's father called the police and he got investigated, Butcher lied harder. The police let him go for the time being, but Butcher was terrified. Hiding the body made what could have been an accident look like real murder. He could lose everything. He could die. He had to get rid of the body. That's when he had an idea. He was a butcher. If he could cut the boy up and sell him as meat, would be the wiser. No one. That's who. No one. So in the dead of night he took his knife to the body and wrapped it like any other cut of meat. The next day he sold it with a nervous smile, and no one questioned it. In fact, people seemed to like it. I suppose compared to the livestock of the time, human meat was clean and healthy. People liked it so much that they started asking for more. Now, Butcher was a nervous man. Though he was nearly out of hot water, he couldn't help but think that people would wonder why his prime meat wasn't as good as this one batch. If they kept asking, if they kept digging, they would make the connection. They would find out his crime. It was definitely a crime now. He couldn't deny that. But no, Butcher wouldn't get caught. He would just have to find more meat. He started with hobos. He would offer them food and lure them to his shop. Then he'd kill them. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that he had gone completely insane. As far as Butcher was concerned, not one was going to miss the vagabond, so it wasn't much of a crime. To make matters worse, real beef was getting even harder to come by. He needed these people or he would go out of business. It was necessary, but Butcher's luck seemed against him. The rail riders realized that Palos Park wasn't a safe place to get off, and they stopped coming. Butcher was again out of meat. When the first child disappeared, people were worried, but no one thought there could be a killer among them. When more disappeared, someone remembered who went missing first, Butcher's apprentice. And wasn't it odd how he still had meat when everyone else was out of business? And wasn't it odd the way homeless men used to wander into his store and never come out. And wasn't it strange the way he would sometimes stare at the children who entered his store? Nothing makes an angry mob form faster than a child killer. This man had taken children, and dissected them like cattle. He had turned the town into cannibals. Oh, God, had parents unknowingly eaten their own children? How many people had died for this man's business? How many people had they eaten? The proof was there on the hooks when they broke into his shop, a child skinned and hanging. No one could tell who it was, but they could only assume that it was the child who went missing the most recently. This man didn't leave survivors. This man didn't hesitate to kill them. Bocher was afraid. Perhaps more afraid than he had ever been. They were gathering outside his house now with knives and axes and fire. Bocher stayed away from the windows even as they were broken by bricks and pavement stones. Bocher stayed near the wall and closed his eyes. There was a pounding on the front door, and then there was a sickening crack as it broke. The people pulled him out onto the yard. Bocher screamed. Everyone came at him at once. The knives bit his skin, the hammers broke his bones, and the police stood back and watched as the citizens punished him. Everything happened quickly, but for Bocher it must have been a lifetime. Finally they ended him with a swift axe to the neck, decapitating him before he could close his eyes for the last time. The butcher had been butchered. This is a true story. I know Palos Park had its own little Sweeney Todd. What a rip-off. But you can easily verify my story with a web search. I'll admit that as a long-time resident of this town, I may have embellished the story a bit, but all the facts are there. Heck, I even threw in that think about it from the killer's perspective. Johnny likes so much. Okay, I'll admit I'm the one who's a bit weird about psychology, but I guess I should explain. I'm writing this because of Johnny. I'm not sure I really want to believe that these things are connected, but there is such a thing as too many coincidences. I tend to be pretty skeptical, but I know when something isn't right. I know when I need to speak out. Johnny is missing, and the butcher is responsible. There's this game we play in town, Find the Head. I suppose the name's kind of self-explanatory. When they cut off Butcher's head, they buried it on Indian Hill. Legend says that they kept his body separate, so he wouldn't be able to rise from the grave and continue his massacre. The problem being Butcher wanted his head back. Everyone pretty much knows that this is a lame add-on to make it seem like the story still going even though Butcher died 100 years ago, something to make kids behave or to scare tourists. But as brave 16-year-olds, we knew better. On days when the internet signal was particularly bad and we were all bored, we would go up to Indian Hill and start digging. Most of the time our efforts were useless. We half expected that the skull had already been found and moved elsewhere, but then Johnny won the game. He was digging at the bottom of the hill by a half-dead pine tree, and he uncovered it. He called us over immediately. He needed help uncovering it, and at first it just looked like a yellow rock, but it was cool to the touch and seemed somewhat softer and lighter than real rock. Slowly we uncovered the shape of the skull, and some of my classmates drew back in fear. No one had ever expected to really find it. It was smaller than I had expected and darker in color. I was so used to the white bones I saw on TV that this dark yellow dirt-encrusted thing seemed even more real to me. The skull was cracked in many places, I noticed, and stained brown and green in places. The textures was rough and porous from the years that had eaten away at it. I was fascinated by it. So was Johnny. After 10 minutes of arguing, our group decided, rather than calling the police or reburying it, Johnny should decide what to do with it because he was the one who found it. I remember the strange look he got when he got to hold the skull again. His cheeks were pale, but his eyes shone brightly. "I'm keeping it," he finally answered. He called me at 5 o'clock in the morning the next day. I thought it was going to be something dumb, but instead I got a panicked whisper. "I haven't slept. Someone's been slicing at my windowsill with a cleaver all night." "I think it's the butcher." I laughed tiredly. I could tell from his voice that he wasn't messing with me. He was definitely terrified. But, another add-on to the myth was that you could sometimes hear the butcher's cleaver ringing against his gravestone. As a result, cleavers are a popular part of Halloween decorations and pranks in our neighborhood, so I just tried to shrug it off. It was probably just Mike or someone playing a trick. Johnny paused for a long moment. "Yeah, maybe." He sounded a little relieved, like he hadn't thought of that, but to tell the truth, I wasn't all that convinced myself. Someone beating the side of your house with a cleaver wasn't what I'd call a funny joke, but some people are stupid like that. It was probably just a coincidence that Johnny found the skull the same day, or even more likely, one of the kids who was with us was being mean. It had to be a prank, though there are no such things as ghosts, and even if there were, they wouldn't be able to wield butcher knives. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself. Then the cleaver incident happened again the next night, and again the night after that. Johnny was really panicking now. The police had been called twice, but they haven't found a thing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no cigarette butts or food wrappers. Just the cleaver marks. Why is he just waiting out there? He told me anxiously the 4th day. Why doesn't he just attack? If he attacks, I can at least fight back. If he attacks, at least it will be over. But all he's doing is breaking my windowsill and stealing my sleep. I don't know. I couldn't deny that it was weird. I was worried. Maybe they don't want to attack while your dad's home. "But why?" Johnny said, exasperated. "If he's afraid of my dad, why does he come at all? If Dad weren't such a heavy sleeper, he could have been out there with a shotgun by now. Wouldn't it be easier to just wait until my dad is out and then terrorize me then? Why does he have to do this to me?" I shrug again, still having no answers, but thinking about something else anyway. "You're staying at my house tonight." Johnny continued pacing, as though he hadn't heard me. "And why me? What did I do to deserve this? It can't be a coincidence that we found a human skull the day he first showed up, but come on. My research says the skull is over 200 years old. It's not like we discovered a recent murder. And none of you guys are getting stalked." "Johnny," I tried to interrupt. He was working himself into a frenzy. I needed to calm him down. "Johnny, I'm too young to die. I only turned 16 last month, and suddenly the demon butcher of Palos is coming after me. How is that fair? I don't even have a license yet. What kind of freak does stuff like this? I know you get the whole he's a coward thing in your weird psychoanalysis, but how do you know? He lived hundreds of years ago, and now he's back. It isn't fair that some ghost monster can just rise from the grave and attack me for no reason. All I did was find a skull. It's not like he needs it anymore." "Johnny," I said loud enough that my friend flinched. "You're staying here tonight. If some guy is after you, it's better you're not in a place he can find you." Really, he seemed shocked by the offer. I guess he thought I'd be too afraid of attracting trouble. But I was better than that. Friends came first. "Really?" I confirmed. Some tension eased from his shoulders. "Besides, you look like you need some proper sleep." I never dreamed that the human copycat, would find my house too. I was taking a risk, but I didn't really believe he would come. Our day went on as normal. I got permission from my dad for Johnny to stay over, and we messed around until midnight. My bed was right next to the window, and Johnny slept on the floor beside it. The moment he closed his eyes, he was out, and I thought it was funny. I, too, quickly fell asleep until the knocking started. I flinched awake, my back to the window, when I heard the heavy thunk of metal into wood. I blinked my eyes, adjusting to the dark, and I saw Johnny's eyes wide and scared in the dark, the dim light from the window reflecting off of them. He saw me move, and the look he gave me pleaded with me to stay still. Thunk. The nose came again, then a sliding scrap as the cleaver was pulled from the wood. Thunk, thunk. Oh God, the man was feet from me. His face must have been visible in the darkness outside because Johnny's eyes never moved from that spot. Thunk. I didn't dare turn or move, or he would no doubt break the window and kill me. Thunk. I could imagine the weapon slicing through my skin as easily as butter. Thunk. That noise punctuating every cut. Thunk. The man laughed suddenly, and my chest clenched. I closed my eyes tightly and waited for him to finally break the window. But all that came was another dull thunk. My beating heart calmed some, but the tension never left it. He was just playing with us, mocking us, until he could finally move in for the kill. Thunk. I could see why Johnny hadn't thought this was a joke. It wasn't funny. Thunk. And then the nose stopped. I waited for a long time, but it didn't come again. I almost relaxed, but for a small headshake Johnny gave from the floor. He was still there. I tried closing my eyes again, tried to block the man's presence from my mind. Then suddenly there was a screeching sound of metal against glass, so sharp that I flinched and gasped in my bed. The man laughed again, and he returned to the steady thunk of cleaver to wood again. At this point it was almost soothing compared to the laughter. Johnny and I did our best to block out the noise. We did our best to close our eyes and sleep. But whenever we actually got close to sleep, the man would change up his routine and scare us anew. It wasn't until 4 or so in the morning that he finally stopped for good. We had a few waning hours to shut down from our exhaustion before my mother came and woke us up. We were both pale, and my mom was quick to notice. When my dad saw the window, he was pissed, but obviously scared. "Why didn't you call me?" he yelled. He was ex-military and could easily handle any opponent. "We were right upstairs. You could have called me for help." He didn't seem to understand how very close this would-be killer was. He hadn't heard a thing. The fact that someone could stand at my window for hours, that someone could have easily killed me in the night, upset him and Mom more deeply than I imagined possible. My parents made Johnny leave and call me into school. The rest of the day was spent moving me into the guest bedroom on the top floor and talking to the police. I love my parents. I tried my best not to think about it. A killer wasn't going to break into my house and kill me. He hadn't stood at my window for 6 hours threatening me with his probably sharp cleaver. I was just dreaming. I was just being paranoid, except I wasn't, because the physical proof was there and being in denial wasn't helping. I could handle this. Dad has taught me basic survival and self-defense. Plus, I was on the second floor now. He wouldn't be able to get me so easily up there. I had to stay calm. The secret to surviving is staying calm. No panicking for me. Another night passed, and for me it was in silence. I still had trouble sleeping, waiting for the telltale thunks. But they never came, and eventually I collapsed into exhaustion. Johnny wasn't as lucky. When I saw him the next day, his skin had a sickly gray tint to it, and the bags under his eyes were as dark as bruises. He seemed to be at the end of his rope. "We have to get rid of it," he said during passing period. "I can't do this anymore. I need sleep." I blinked, and it took me a moment to realize what he was talking about. "You mean the skull? You still have it? You?" He was breathing heavily and closed his eyes as though he resisting hurting me. I haven't been thinking straight. You understand, Derek? I haven't slept in days. Even during the day I am not safe. I keep hearing him. I keep hearing that damn knocking. It won't leave me alone. You have to help me. You have to help me get rid of it." I had taken a few steps back because he kind of looked crazy and people were staring. But he quickly moved back into my personal space, a pleading look on his face. "Please." I had somehow walked into an ultimatum. Either I could sacrifice our friendship and do the smart thing, where I avoided going to a secluded place when we knew there was someone stalking us, or I could have his back and do something obviously stupid. Sometimes loyalty sucked. Fine, I sighed. This was stupid. I knew it was stupid. But he was my friend, and we were safer as a group. Friends have to be stupid together, I guess. We met up after school, dropped by his house, and rode our bikes out towards the edge of town. We made a deep trek into the for-sale property and got scratched up by trees and bushes nearly every step. My patience was running thin. But whenever I asked why we couldn't just bury the thing already, Johnny said we weren't deep enough. It has to be somewhere no one will ever find. At this point, no one will ever find us, I scowled. This was stupid. This was so dangerously stupid. Let's finish this. Johnny stopped. All I could see was his back, but in his voice I heard a kind of resolve. "You're right," he said calmly. "Let's finish this." Then he turned around, and I saw a glint of silver in his hand. I flinched backwards in shock. A knife. Johnny was holding a knife. What the fuck? My friend's face was drawn. He seemed old and tired, but he was looking at me with this hungry look. "Please understand," he sounded guilty. "I have to do this, Derek. I have to do this. It's the only way I'm going to get sleep. He won't leave alone. He wants blood, Derek, and I have to give it to him." I backed up into a tree, my heart beating fast, my mind reeling for answers. "I don't understand. Who needs blood? What are you talking about?" "The butcher," he sighed sadly. "The butcher is hunting me. He's the one that's been knocking at my window. He's the one making me do this. If," he choked up, and his eyes filled with tears, "if I don't do this, he'll kill me." Suddenly he lashed out with the blade. I managed to duck out of the way purely on instinct. I fell to the ground hard, and the steel of the blade lodged itself in the tree where I had been standing moments ago. I stumbled quickly to my feet and tried to put as much distance between us as I could. "Johnny," I gasped, trying to reason with him, kind of panicking. "This is crazy. You don't have to do this." Killing me won't change anything. Come on, we're friends." He stared at me through tears now. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Derek." Johnny. And for a moment I was angry. He was acting crazy. He was going to kill me just so he could get some sleep. And I had trusted him. I had come out here at my own risk to help him, and he was going to kill me for that. He swung the knife again, and I blocked it with my arm, pushing his knife hand wide. Pain seared across the limb, but I was grateful for the self-defense my dad had given me. Johnny's eyes widened for a moment, like he hadn't expected me to fight. It was enough of an opening. I shouldered into his chest, knocking him off balance, and we both fell backwards onto the ground, our landing punctuated by a dull thunk. I fell off him and quickly scrambled away, breathless and bleeding and ready to fight. But Johnny didn't move. I caught my breath and waited, my heart pounding in my ears, but Johnny didn't move. I stared, my mind trying to make sense of the situation as my anger faded away. He was sleeping. His eyes were wide open, but he had been so tired. That had to be it. He was sleeping. That was all. That was why he wasn't moving. He needed sleep. Somewhere in the woods I heard the distinct snap of a twig breaking. I saw a distant shadow of a man. He was coming. Shit. My adrenaline-addled brain rushed through the possibilities. The butcher, the police, and Johnny was. Fear got the better of me, and I ran. There isn't a moment I don't regret running. But what could I do? He was sleeping, and we were in danger. Loyalty had lost, and now my friend was gone. I had gotten lost until, well, after dark in those thick woods, my fear never leaving me. By the time I got out, the police were looking for us. I must have looked like a mess, and was hauled off to the town station by the first cop I came across. A doctor was called in, cleaned me up, and said I was dealing with shock. My parents nearly strangled me with their worried hugs, and all I could think was that there was a strange ringing in my ears. I spent a couple of hours in the police station, wrapped in warm blankets and answering questions. I lied and said that Johnny and I were attacked by a large man with a cleaver. I didn't want to get my friend in trouble over a sleepy mistake. Beyond that, I told the truth. We were in the woods on the edge of town. We were trying to get rid of the butcher's skull. Johnny fell down. My story seemed to fit with the window stalker thing we had called them about, so they didn't probe much deeper. No one blamed me, not even Johnny's parents. People kept looking at me like I was some kind of victim. It was weird, and it put a sick feeling in my gut. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. They all acted like they understood what had happened. They thought I was lucky to have gotten away. But they were wrong. I was a coward. I had run when my friend was hurt. I had run when he had needed my help. Maybe that was why I kept seeing his face in my head, his green eyes wide and glassy, his eyes empty, but I couldn't have killed him. I hadn't pushed him that hard. He wouldn't have died from that. I was wasting time thinking about it. No, it had to be the butcher. This wasn't my fault. This man had come knocking at our window with a meat cleaver. This man had driven Johnny crazy. This man was in the woods that night. He was the one who took Johnny. He was the one who killed him. They never found the body. I miss him, and I'm sorry that I left him there alone. Johnny is missing. The butcher was responsible for it. Story 7. Hunger in the Skies over Ontario. Frank Riker and Stanley Dawson flew in their plane, heading home. The two men had been on a business trip in Alaska deciding the fate of their company. The company was doing well, and the men were offered money to sell out. The meeting in Alaska had not been a success, as they felt the money offered was not enough. Riker wanted more money and would not accept less than the very most he could get for his company. Dawson agreed. He was not opposed to sitting on the company until better offers came around. They decided to fly over Canada, as Dawson loved the scenery. He loved the purity of the forests. There wasn't a splotch of humanity as far as the eye could see where they were. To Dawson, it was serene. "So, Frank," Dawson spoke, eyes still glued to the landscape, "how long are we going to hold out?" The man watched the skies, looking for any sign of a storm. "I don't know, but I won't accept less than 30 million. I'm looking to retire wealthy, man. No way am I taking 25 million when I can wait a few weeks and get 30. That's just good business." "I guess that's right. I can wait, too." Dawson was silent for a moment, then decided to speak again. "Boy, Canada sure is cold this time of year." They flew over the province in the dead of winter. January weather was unforgiving in Canada, for to New Yorkers like them. Damned right, Stan. "I could never live out here." "I think I could. I like the trees and the fresh air. The city is too much for me." "Not me, man." Riker chuckled. "The city is where the wealth is. Money, women, good food. That's where I can have it all." What more could a man ask for? The two sat in silence for the greater portion of an hour before Riker noted some turbulence in the wind. He had noticed the clouds rolling in slowly as time went by, and at this point the sky was completely overcast. Snow began to fall in great amounts. The winds picked up, and threw the snow around in all directions. Before he knew it, Riker had flown himself into a snowstorm. "Shit, I didn't think we would face this weather," spat Riker as he looked ahead, assessing the storm. He saw heavier clouds and snow ahead. The storm was getting worse, the winds intensifying. The plane was taking on the burden of the rapid winds, and it became harder and harder for Riker to control. Soon the wings were losing wind, and the plane's flight became erratic. "What's happening, Frank?" "It's the storm. The winds are blowing in too many directions. A plane like this could drop in this weather." Riker looked frustrated, flipping switches and turning control dials. Dawson looked around, assessing the weather. "The forecast didn't say anything about a snowstorm this afternoon." "I know. It's odd. It came out of nowhere. Suddenly, the winds picked up. The turbulence became so fierce that Riker completely lost control of the plane, and it tossed about at the mercy of the storm. The nose dipped, and the plane began to lose altitude. As it dropped, Riker struggled to get the nose to turn up. The storm had drastically reduced visibility, and Riker had little bearing on his altitude. He felt he could crash into the trees at any moment. Dawson braced himself in the plane, expecting impact. His heart raced. He was scared for his life. Riker caught a wind and managed to pull the nose of the plane up. He angled the rudders to reduce speed and shut the motor off. He knew he wasn't going to be able to continue through the storm. He was just hoping for a soft landing. The landing was indeed soft relative to what it could have been. The plane suddenly smacked into the tops of the pine trees and tumbled down to the ground. A considerable amount of speed had been lost by the time the plane touched down to the forest floor. The two men were not even scratched, but the plane had been badly damaged. Both wings had been torn off, and there was significant crumpling in the tail. Happy to be alive, Dawson let out a sigh of relief. Not a bad landing, Frank, I'll say. We are lucky we caught that wind, or we'd be gone. After a moment of cooling off, the two men had absorbed the physical shock of the landing and the emotional shock of nearly crashing. Riker looked around, realizing he was surrounded by trees, and cursed. Reality had hit him. What? Dawson looked over at him. What's wrong? What's wrong? Look around you, Stan. We are in the middle of the forest. There's no place to go for dozens of miles. We are stuck out here with a trashed plane. Does the radio work? Riker checked the controls, and at a moment of celebration, when he found that the plane's radio was functional, it works. We will send out a distress beacon and hope that someone finds us. Are you hurt? There's supplies in the back. I'm fine. We can save them. We don't know how long this will take. Did you pack any food? I have a survival kit in the back as well. It has some provisions. We can hold out for a little while on those for now. Let's check the plane. Riker opened up the door and climbed out of the Cessna. The cold was blistering, and the wind snap hit any exposed flesh. He walked around the plane, assessing the scope of the damage. It was worse than he thought. The landing gear and bottom section of the plane was crushed. He looked over and made out the form of one of the wings several yards away. It was hard for him to see in the storm. The wind blew snow around, and the frozen rain blanketed the ground. These were harsh conditions, but Riker felt that things could be worse. He climbed back into the plane and sat in his seat. He turned on the radio beacon and listened in for any transmissions. After a few hours of sitting and listening, Dawson noticed a change in the weather. The storm had subsided, and the winds had died down. The snow was still falling, but it was a declining, peaceful rain as opposed to a flurry of biting hail. Sitting there, Dawson noted how dark it was. He strained to look up at the sky. Between the clouds, he could see it was already night. Frank, what time is it? He asked. Looking down at his watch, Riker saw the time and craned his head in surprise. It is only 5:30 p.m. That's odd. It's completely dark outside. Out of the corner of his eye, Dawson noted a swipe. It was minute, but he thought he saw a shadow zip between the trees. Looking closely, he surveyed the area. He found nothing. Wary of the environment, he studied the trees around where he'd seen the shadow. The situation was frightening, and Dawson thought the possibility of running into wolves or other predators was real. He had considered the wildlife around Ontario coupled with the season. If someone didn't pick up on his transmission, he may not survive. In his mind, he began to panic. He didn't want to die, not without the full life experience. He hadn't gotten married or had any children. He felt he was too young to die. Riker was having issues as well. He knew if nobody came, they would have to try and find someone living out in the forest for help. If not, the two of them would freeze to death or starve. His mind raced, his savings, his bonds, all for nothing. He hadn't become fabulously wealthy yet. Riker hated the idea of starving out in the forest, as far away from his bank account as he could be. The two looked at each other. They understood their mutual concern. Riker looked at the survival kit, then back at Dawson. Listen, Stan. He sighed. We have to decide what we are going to do right off the bat. We could stay in the plane and wait for someone to answer our transmission. If no one does, we freeze and starve in here. Or We could ditch the plane and try to find some help. If we don't find anyone, we freeze and starve out there. What are we going to do?" Dawson thought for a minute. Well, even if we weren't in the plane, a distress signal would have the officials send a search party anyway. We might as well leave and hope for the best. Good point. Let's go. Riker crawled into the back of the plane and pulled out his large survival pack. He slung it over his shoulder and climbed out of the plane alongside Dawson. Knowing he was heading east when he landed, Riker decided to go in the direction that the plane's nose was pointing. The two men trekked through the snow, surveying their surroundings, looking for any sign of life. Dawson was hoping they would get lucky, but he knew there was nobody for miles and miles. He didn't want to give up, but the chances were grim. The other option seemed less sensible to him anyway. Dawson kept looking behind him as well. He couldn't shake the slight feeling that he was being watched. They had walked for several hours when Riker decided it was time to stop. They took a rest next to a large pine tree, and Riker pulled out some canned beans from the kit. The two ate in silence, slowly consuming the food for energy. Riker suggested that they sleep in that spot, and Dawson agreed. Sleeping in the frozen woods proved a chore for both men, but Riker in particular had issues sleeping. As soon as he fell asleep, he began to have nightmares. A tall figure haunted his dreams, oblique in nature. He could only make out certain parts of it as it chased him down. A thin, lanky form, sharp claws and antlers. It was covered in blood. The dreams haunted him all night, and he continually woke to the eerie sound of howling wind. Then, waking for the last time, he crawled over to the survival kit. For some reason, he woke up hungry. When Dawson fell back into consciousness, he expected to find Riker lying next to him. Instead, he looked up to see Riker hunched over the survival bag. The man grunted and smacked his jaw. He had noticed Dawson and looked up at him. Food covered his face and shirt, and trash littered the ground around him. "What happened?" Dawson shouted at him. "That's all of our food." "I don't know, Stan. I was just so hungry. I couldn't help it. I needed the food. I needed it bad. I don't know why. You ate almost all our food." He continued as he sprung up and walked over to the bag, only to find it mostly devoid of canned food. "I'm sorry." I woke up and started eating. I couldn't control myself. I think I'm okay now, though. I just can't believe that I managed to eat it all. "I'm so sorry, Stan. I know what this means." Dawson shook his head. "I can't believe this. This food was supposed to last us until we found help. Now we are going to die out here." After a minute of standing there, shocked and angry at his friend, he spoke again. "Well, there's no point in fighting about it. Let's just go." The two packed up and started out again. Riker looked up and noticed the sky was still dark. He checked his watch. It was 7:14 a.m. and still dark. "Hey, Stan, it is morning time now, but it's still dark." "What?" "Oh, man, I don't understand. Maybe the sun rises late this morning." He looked up, nervous. "I'm sure we will see it soon." The two walked in the forest for hours without the sun. Neither chose to speak about it. They were too freaked out to say anything. Dawson walked along, studying the trees. After looking at the trees for many hours, they began to take on a different light to him. On the plane ride over, he found them beautiful and majestic. Now they seemed looming, creepy, almost sinister. He began to feel the trees watching him. All the while he kept seeing little shifts in the shadows, as if something very fast was running between trees. It usually escaped him before he saw anything, but he always noticed it again. At first he thought it was just his eyes in the cold and the shock from the landing, but he began to second-guess himself. He felt tracked, as if someone or something was moving around with the express purpose of following him. He felt watched from the shadows. It made him anxious. On top of that, the feeling in his gut of being watched had greatly intensified. It started to make Dawson believe he was being followed. He decided to say nothing to Riker. For Riker, it was the wind. As he walked, he could hear the whistling of the wind through the trees. It was slight but noticeable. The whistle seemed natural, but over time it took on a different tone. It became a twisted rendition of the original tone, slightly diminished. The overall note was soured and persistent. He felt like the wind itself had consciousness, and the very vibrations in his ears were a means for the color of the wind to seep into his mind. Then there was the hunger. Riker felt like he was starving to death, even though it had not even been a day since the plane had went down. He was still thinking about the previous night. He just could not wrap his mind around why he had eaten all of their food. It was strange and unnatural to Riker. He was still hungry, though. He wanted more. Riker kept his eyes out for rabbits or other small wildlife he could trap and eat. He decided not to talk to Dawson about it. Between the two, the anxiety of the situation became almost too much for them. At the same time, they walked for more than 12 hours with no food or water, as Riker had eaten all the food over the night. The sun had not shone all day, and the time was nearly 8 p.m. The tension became thick. The breaking point was a nose. It was not a minute nose, nor a loud one. The nose had no specific direction, but seemed to have come from somewhere in the near distance. It was a crack of wood, followed by loud thump and rustling of branches. A tree had fallen over somewhere. Dawson looked up and around. He thought the wind could have knocked it over, but the crack was too sharp. It had to be cut down. Dawson threw his head up and screamed, "Hey, is anybody there?" He listened to the echo as it ran through the trees. Waiting for almost 5 minutes, he heard no response. He looked over to Riker, who had already picked a direction to go and find the source of the nose. They ran in that direction and went about 100 yards until they found it. It was a tree lying on the ground, not covered in snow. The base had large slashes in it, looking like the claw marks of an oversized bear. There were similar markings on the stump nearby and on the ground as well. The ground was covered in wide arcs, as if the claws were swiped in a pattern such as to draw attention to the ground. Riker and Dawson didn't know what to think. Then the same noise was heard behind them, this time closer. Riker whipped around to locate the source. He began to walk over in the direction of the sound. Dawson stood frozen in fear. The chilling thought had come over him. The noises were distractions. Whatever made them, it was toying with the two men. He tried to comprehend what this meant for Riker and himself. They were being stalked, and he knew it. Dawson rejoined his companion, who had found the second tree. It was knocked over, with the same markings in it. On the ground held similar patterns as the first space. Dawson knew full well that whatever made the first markings had certainly made these. He looked over at Riker, who had fallen to his knees. "WHA, what is this?" Riker scrambled to speak. "What's going on?" "I don't know, but we need to go." Dawson picked his confused friend up, and the two started walking again. Wary of the circumstances, Dawson watched the forest closely, looking for any sign of what was stalking them. After they had walked for a few more hours, the two became too exhausted to continue. Sitting against a pine tree, Dawson thought harder about the situation. He felt the chances of them surviving were low. At the same time, he hadn't actually seen anything. He had been looking at trees and snow for the past day. His mind was exhausted alongside his body. He didn't even know if he was being stalked, but it seemed clear to him that he was. That was the most maddening part of this whole experience. In his mind, he began to think of all scenarios where he could die: starvation, freezing, or at the hands of this thing. The more Dawson thought, the more nightmarish the whole experience felt. He couldn't even tell what time it was. The night had spilled over into day. The cold had gotten to him too. It was freezing the whole time. He slept in his wet, chilly clothes. He was dehydrated. He hadn't had any water in a long time. Also, he was very hungry, tired. Dawson was ready to give up. He looked over at Riker, who sat shivering, silent. The man looked broken. He hadn't been taking things well. He had an episode the night before where he'd lost control of himself and had eaten all of their food. Riker also had been anxious the past day and was now nearing complete incapacitation. He was acting strange, as if he smelled something. Lifting his chin, he just kept sniffing and looking around. Dawson couldn't smell anything, but he decided it was time to sleep. He laid himself on the snow and started to drift off. His dreams were full of terror. It was him running naked through the snow, being chased by something. Looking back, he could barely make out the figure behind him, but it appeared to be elongated. He could make out limbs stretching out from the figure and sharp protrusions. The scent of blood was on the wind. He heard a shriek, a terrible cry that broke its way into his head and filled his heart with horror. The sound made him trip over himself, and he whipped around just in time for the figure to catch up to him. Looking up, he could finally see the figure in full view. It was Riker. Crazy-eyed, he lurched towards Dawson. Dawson woke himself from the dream. When he came to, the cold hit him again. He looked over to see if Riker was there, but he couldn't find him. Picking himself up, Dawson scanned his view for any sign of Riker. He didn't find the man, but he did find Riker's clothes. The man left them, and they were scattered on the ground. The winds had picked up, and Dawson had a hard time seeing anything. He did notice some footprints fading with the falling snow. Riker was naked, but not cold. He felt a burning sensation all over his body as he ran through the woods. His mind was everywhere, every sound and sight, taste and smell. It all haunted him. He was being hunted. He just knew it. He wasn't going to let whatever it was get the best of him. Most of all, though, was the hunger. Riker's whole body ached from the hunger. He wanted to eat. He wanted to eat anything. He stopped for a moment to eat some snow and dirt. Shoving the sludge into his mouth, he almost felt better, but he knew it wasn't food. He looked down at his own arm. The glistening flesh, his own flesh, looked attractive to him. He wanted badly to just take a bite. Right as he raised his arm up to his mouth, a shriek pierced the wind. He heard the scream and bolted through the woods. Hearing the haunting cry from his nightmares, Dawson froze again. For a moment, he could feel the utter fear of the loathing sound. In his ears, it held an insatiable evil, Dawson considered surrendering, standing still for a time until he succumbed to the cold and evil. He looked around, watching the wind throw the snow around. The trees seemed to go on forever, a never-ending formation of wood and snow. Realizing he had momentarily lost himself, Dawson picked up his feet and started running. Dawson ran, not knowing why, for close to 15 minutes. When he came to the clearing, he dropped to his knees, utterly defeated, as he stared at the downed Cessna he had been flying in just days before. He had gone in a complete circle, accomplishing nothing. By now Dawson had lost the will to go on, and he sat there for a while, trying to think. The thing was, he couldn't think. He was too afraid. The situation was grim, and the whole time he felt the snow and forest draining his sanity. He had heard noises, seen odd things he didn't know were real. His mind kept turning over, trying to rationalize thought, but it had lost the ability to think rationally. Thinking he was being tracked and forced into his actions, he felt helpless. He started shivering, wondering when death, whatever form it may take, would come for him. His thought was interrupted by a heavy breathing behind him. Whipping around, Dawson saw the shivering form of his friend, Riker. This Riker was different, though. He was covered in dirt and otherwise naked. His eyes bulged out of his head, red with insanity. His lips were gone. He had eaten them off. The teeth were fully exposed, and his chin was streaked with his own blood. He took a step towards Dawson, focusing intently on the man. Riker found this food to be appetizing. He saw an entire day's meal in the man in front of him. The flesh would be succulent, full of blood. He looked at his friend's face, eyeing the exposed cheeks, the chewy ears. He could have his meal right then, and be full again for a moment. He was so hungry, Riker could hardly stand it. The hunger took over his body. He was shaking with the excitement. Heat, heat, heat. It was all he could think. He didn't speak. He didn't feel anything besides the sheer hunger. Dawson jumped up, seeing the madness in Riker's eyes. He knew he was going to die, but he didn't know it was going to be Riker. The man had not acted right since the first night. He had been on a slow decline. He was always greedy, hungering for money, but now it appeared to Dawson that he hungered for something else. Dawson ran past the plane, expecting Riker to be close after him, but he wasn't. Looking behind, he couldn't see Riker. Heart pounding, hands and feet numb, Dawson ran through the woods, trying to keep away from Riker. He looked over his shoulder to check, and in turn neglected to see the fallen tree in front of him. The fall to the ground was cushioned by the thick blanket of snow. Looking all around, disoriented, he could see nothing. The wind had picked up, and visibility was almost zero. Though the winds and snow picked up, the forest fell oddly silent. Not a sound was heard by Dawson as he lay in the snow, soaked to the bone, frozen, hungry. The darkness had persisted for over 48 hours, and it had taken its toll on the man. Deep down, he didn't want to die, but he couldn't think of a way out of the nightmare he had slipped into. He started crying, thinking about the death he was faced with. He thought of the company he and Riker owned. They should have taken the offer in Alaska. If they had, they would be parting there right now, safe and warm. Instead, they headed back home in a damn Cessna. Things had happened so fast for him, and he hardly had time to process his own demise. His thoughts were broken by a sound behind him, rolling over. He found the source of the sound. Tears in his eyes, he couldn't make out the figure looming over him. He wiped his eyes and took in the form. What he so rendered him still, frozen in utter horror. A single scream broke the silence of the forest.